I think despite the clear international prohibition, the Israel military government has carried out thousands of these home demolition, as you said before, with impunity, resulting in the thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians left without basic shelter and experiencing a drastic blow of their life, as we all know, some becoming refugees for the second or even third time in their life. It is very, very important to consider this point as well. For us in Bangkok, particularly of Muslim organization in Bangkok, we consider that none of the governments or even international bodies that criticize Israel destruction of Palestinian home has taken any concrete action to stop it. And apart from that, despite universal condemnation by human rights organizations, when I saw the film, I think Corey was acting in the tradition of non-violence movements. You may compare with those leaders like Martin Luther King or even Mahatma Gandhi, or even some of the new movement in this country like non-violence movement. So many justice and human rights defenders before Russia and Korea have lost their life in their struggle for righteousness and in their attempts to make this world a better place. And of course, others will follow after her, in my view. So in a very direct way, Russians stood up for family values and for those who were too poor and powerless to be able to protect themselves. She was, in my view, a true American hero. I don't know, it seemed to me like that, because I believe that most of the American people believe in freedom and liberty, but in this case, very sad for her families. You can say that several years from 1948 onwards, Palestinians whose homes are destroyed or who die trying to protect them and maybe called terrorists or terrorist supporters. But for Rachel, I think she was not Palestinian and therefore was hard to label a terrorist. But nevertheless, Rachel was blamed for her own death. In addition, Rachel was accused of protecting terrorists. I try to look into the detail of her support. I mean, particularly her fathers and mothers movement at the moment. So when she was killed, Rachel was engaging in what is typically a relative low-risk action, serving as international monitor to an ongoing balanced abuse of international human rights law and confronting a soldier in the process of committing an act of violence against an unarmed, non-violent Palestinian family. So in this sense, Rachel was clearly identifiable and non-threatening in both her nature and approach. You can see from the film. Rachel did put her life on the line to stand up against a policy that is inhumane. So thousands of people do this every single day around the globe in an effort to stop violence and atrocity against land, people, animals, and crops. And as you said, I think there are some important human rights questions. Let me raise some of these questions. How many Palestinian families lost a loved one and then live with the injustice that the murderer remains unpunished? Number two, when will the world show they value Palestinian life just as much as Israeli life? Before there can be peace, this inequality needs resolution. I just got recent news because the day before yesterday there was a conference in Makkah, in Makkah, the base. There was a conference organized by Muslim World League. It is very important organization nowadays, based in Makkah in Saudi Arabia. The conference, on part of the Palestinian cause, the conference tried to ask us all that. At first, they say to some of the from Muslims, of course, they said Muslim leaders and organizations should continue their defense of the Palestinian people and their rights to establish their own state with Al-Quds, which means Jerusalem, as the capital. And the conference condemned the unethical state of Gaza and asked the UN, UNESCO, and all peace-loving organizations to stop Israel from demolishing the Aqsa Mosque, not only the house of the Palestinian, but also Aqsa Mosque. You know about Aqsa Mosque? It is one of the most important mosques in the Muslim world. And it's also called for supporting the steadfastness of the people of Gaza and supplying them with urgent human assistance. You can see from the last month, I think, the flotilla, it was caused by Israel, right? So in this sense, this conference asked the countries of the world and their people and organizations to exert all possible effort to end the predicament of the Palestinian people in Gaza. So they try to mention about the situation in Gaza nowadays. So I think this is very important in terms of us here under the name of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, or PSC in Thailand, to organize this kind of event in order to express our views and ideas to support what Kerry has done, particularly in distributing this type of film to other groups of people in Thailand. I think people at the center, the Islamic Center of Thailand, support this kind of movement all the ways. So that's all I want to say first, and then we will discuss later on.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pakorn, for your poignant remarks and your very unique perspectives on this. And that statement you read, we welcome, of course, and certainly hope that many governments of the world at least implement the spirit of it. Nick Ferryman, would you please also make your presentation now?
Test, test, test. Oh, yes, it is on. Yes, thank you. Dr. Mike, thank you. Dr. Pakorn, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. The documentary we saw this evening of Rachel in the last few months in Gaza before her deaths, she was there to bear witness to the crimes that are being committed against the Palestinians. She also reminds us that the Palestinians are human, lest we forget. And therefore, as humans, they're entitled to the same inalienable rights as we are. The right to life, the right to liberty, two rights that Dr. Pakorn mentioned. And also the right to self-determination. I wonder whether she'd be surprised 7 years on after her death that the situation has in fact got worse. It's so bad that even the UK Prime Minister, a friend of Israel, has come out and said that the siege in Gaza resembles a prison camp. That's a major step forward, I think, in the perspective of the British government publicly. And what we're witnessing is collective punishment that Dr. Mike talked about there. A collective punishment that Chris Patton, in an article, also a member of the same party as David Cameron, was saying in The Nation today, that the Gazans are being punished for choosing a government of their own, unfortunately a regime that the rest of the world is not prepared to accept. So this is collective punishment for an electoral decision on behalf of the Palestinians in Gaza. So that collective punishment is a violation of the Geneva Convention. It also is a blow against the right to self-determination, that third right I just mentioned, one of these three inalienable rights that Thomas Locke talks about. And that, I think, is the underlying focus in my speech and the time I have this evening, is to look at self-determination there. And self-determination means the right for the Palestinians and anyone else to choose a government of their own to govern themselves, choosing their own representatives. It means deciding their own laws to run their own community that reflects their values, their culture, their tradition, not other people's values, not other people's traditions and culture, their own. That is self-determination. So self-determination is a communal right. It's a communal right which individual human rights are embedded. In fact, so important is the right to self-determination. It is the first article in the ICCPR. Dr. Pakorn mentioned the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The ICCPR is the legal expression of that document. And the number one article is the right to self-determination. It is that important. Now, if you read that first article, you'll come across the word subsistence. That's right, subsistence, the right, the ability to feed and clothe and put a roof over your head. What's that doing in there? Well, John Locke, the father of modern secular democracy, the inspiration behind the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, wrote that without subsistence, if you can't put a roof over your head, feed your family and clothe yourselves, okay, you are not independent. You are dependent on the goodwill and aid of other people, like the Gazans are dependent on the goodwill and aid of the international community today. So without subsistence, you are dependent. You are not independent. You are not free. You don't have self-determination. And that strikes, I believe, right at the heart of that international human rights paradigm that we have since 1945. Even Chris Patton has come out and said, Chris Patton, as that article he wrote in today in The Nation, has also said earlier, a couple of weeks ago, again, he's not an ardent Palestinian by any stretch, Palestinian supporter by any stretch of the imagination, a member of the Tory party, ardent fans of Israel. Many of the Conservative MPs are friends of Israel and association in the UK. Even he is so bad that even he has come out and acknowledged that the Israelis have deliberately triggered an economic and social collapse in Gaza. So that blockade, that siege, is an assault on the Palestinians, not just their right to self-determination, but their right to subsistence. And that's what I want to look at now. I look at three issues here of their security, their food security, their water security, and their employment security. Key elements of that right to subsistence, without which you don't have freedom, you don't have independence. So I'll look at food first. Gaza is a very small place. You might have seen it on the map. It's only 40 k's long, 9 k's wide. That's 365 square kilometers. That's a quarter of the size of Bangkok. Population density slightly less than Bangkok. Bangkok has got a huge agricultural hinterland to feed it. Gaza, if it's going to be self-sufficient, has to feed itself from within inside that 365 square kilometers. Can it do it? The answer very simply is no. Let's have a look why. Half of Gaza is under arable land. It's 45%. That's 170 square kilometers. That's 45% of the available land is cultivated. But there's a big problem. Today, half that land is no longer accessible. And that's what the UN is saying. And there are two reasons why. Both are a direct consequence of Israeli action, military action. First of all, most of that arable land is up along the eastern edge of the border fence with Israel. And there's a buffer zone, a kilometer wide, that runs all the way up to 40 kilometers. On that northern border of 9 k's, and the villages of Bet Hanun and Bet Latia, the buffer zone is 3 kilometers. So we're talking with 60 kilometers, 60 square kilometers of arable land. That's 35% of the total arable land is inaccessible, because if Palestinians go into that buffer zone, they're shot at. In the last 18 months, we've had 13 Palestinians shot dead on their farmland inside that buffer zone. So it's a no-go zone. It's inaccessible to farming. In addition to that, during Operation Cast Lead 18 months ago, we had 17% of the farmland was destroyed. And you heard Rachel Corrie talking about the greenhouses being locked down. That happened again, that's 5 years later. Same thing. Greenhouses can't be repaired. This is intensive market gardening, isn't it? We're talking about the orchards being destroyed. We're talking about olive trees being uprooted. That was 30 square kilometers of farmland destroyed. Dr. Shamar from Heidelberg University in Germany is saying it's going to take years for that to revegetate. So it's not accessible for quite a few years to come. So the Palestinians actually have half of their available farmland under crops. And that, by my estimation, is probably enough to feed about 150, maybe at the maximum, in optimum conditions, 200,000 people. So that's 1 in 10. 1 in 8 of the population can be fed by the food that's directly available inside Gaza. So in effect, it's totally dependent on food imports. So if you blockade it, very quickly there is going to be a food crisis. So there's a problem, huge problem about food security there. The next thing I'd like to look at is water. A key issue. The Middle East has a water shortage, and the UN, the United Nations Development Programme, was saying back in 2006 that the Palestinians have the most acute water shortage in the world. They have, per capita, 70 to 80 litres of water a day. That may sound quite a reasonable amount when Westerners have access to, say, 200 to 300 litres of water a day. They have access to 70 to 80 litres of water a day. But there's a major problem. 95% of that water, according to the World Health Organization and other academics and scientists who've been there sampling the waters, say 95% of that water is polluted. Polluted with fecal and microbial contamination, contaminated with toxins, nitrates and chlorides. So in effect, the average Palestinian has available anywhere between 3 and 5 litres of water a day for safe drinking, for cooking and drinking. That's on the public water supply. So there is a parallel private water supply as well that attempts to meet, because 3 to 5 litres a day really is pushing it, isn't it? Yeah, there is a parallel system in place that comes through the tunnels. Also, there's some private water wells Again, but when they've been testing them, the water at source is clean, but by the time it's been manhandled through the tunnels, manhandled into water carriers, manhandled into jerry cans, it is also heavily contaminated with microbes. But perhaps the greatest danger for the Palestinians' water security is the underlying aquifer, which supplies all of that water that they extract. Because they're extracting too much, even to supply that 70 to 80 litres a day, so much that they expect in the next 5 to 10 years, all of the underlying water aquifer will be polluted with brines and brackish water that's seeped into the aquifer because of the water they've taken off from the top. That will mean all of the water in Gaza will not be fit to drink in the next 5, 10 years, which is why way back in the 1990s, after the Oslo Peace Accords, they wanted to build a water desalination plant. Israel's built 3 now. Okay, Gazans were supposed to get one. I'm sure if they did have one, it would have been bombed anyway. But I'll move on to my last issue, okay, that I'd like to talk about tonight. And there are many other issues related to the Gazans' security. And it's just to look at employment. If we want to understand the employment situation in Gaza, I think we have to understand the effect the blockade is having. Yes, it's having a problem with the imports. Import levels are at 5 to 25% of what they were pre-blockade. And one of the ways they have of judging that is to measure the number of vehicles coming in each day. 4 or 5 years ago, there were 800 vehicles a day, trucks coming in to Gaza. Okay, today it's between 40 or 50 trucks coming in. Having said that, the situation on food, for example, has significantly improved with the trucks coming in as a result of the attack on the flotilla 2 months ago. It's forced the Israelis to open up a few more trucks coming in every day. But I don't know whether that's going to be a long-term or a temporary measure on that there. That's on the import side. The export side, there are 0 exports. There have been no exports from Gaza for over 3 years. That has had a devastating impact on the economy. The World Bank, and in particular on the industrial sector, there, the one that can earn the foreign currency to pay for food imports and to pay for clean water, etc. The World Bank has said back in 2009 that 98% of industrial enterprises have closed down. The Palestine Federation of Industry has said that has thrown 140,000 people out of work. That's 28% of the workforce. Yes, some of those people would have migrated into other jobs inside Gaza. Remember, the blockade is not just things coming in, but things going out, and that means also people not being allowed to go out and perhaps earn remittances that they can send back to Gaza. So no one's allowed out. So the unemployment rate at the end of December 2009, 6 months ago, was just over 40%. Yes, it's drifted down a little bit as a consequence of a lot of the aid that's come in the last couple of months. It's had a big impact there, but I suspect that's only going to be temporary. So to sum up, we have no subsistence security in Gaza. I haven't talked about energy. I haven't talked about the psychological trauma. I haven't talked about the educational impact that has had on that. I've just talked about those 3 issues there that I think deal with subsistence. So Gaza doesn't have subsistence security, and that's a violation of self-determination, one of those fundamental international human rights that it has. And I think that without a negotiated settlement, the situation is going to deteriorate get worse. And I think really I see only one real major way of bringing this to a halt, and that is a global movement. It's not only focused on the Israelis, but focused on the Western community in particular, because Gaza isn't the only blockade, is it? The blockade is a deliberate attack on the civil population. And I think one of our duties as global citizens is to make sure blockades are no longer used as a weapon of war in times of peace against the civil population. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, thank you. for, as always, insightful analyses. Well, Nick talked a bit about food. I think the evening has given us overwhelming food for thought. That is for sure. We do have some minutes for questions and answers. So if you do have any points you'd like to make or questions, do please take to the microphone up there in the middle, at the back. Don't be shy. It is a little late, of course, but I think we've done the right thing to prioritize the film and also the speakers. But again, we do have some minutes, so if anyone would like to or ask for some sort of clarification, then do please take the opportunity. And of course, the gentleman who's going up there right now doesn't probably need any introduction, but do please tell us who you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. My name is Imtiaz Muqbil from the Bangkok Post. I have one question for Dr. Pakorn and one question each for Dr. Mike and Mr. Fairman. Ajahn Khap, these Muslim World League resolutions, you know, if I sit down and count the number of resolutions that have been issued by the Muslims and the Arab world about condemning the Israelis, I think we will solve the global warming problem. They don't seem to do anything else apart from issuing another piece of paper which is then tossed into the bin. Nobody seems to do anything about it. There doesn't seem to be effective seriousness. Could you explain to me what is the use of another resolution? And what good is it going to do, another condemnation that is coming out from these places? Because people like me, we are getting quite sick of all these resolutions and condemnations because they don't do any good. The Arab world becomes more and more humiliated and does not get taken in seriously by any of this. So is it about time to maybe stop issuing condemnations and resolutions and actually doing something? And this same question to both Mr. Fairman and Dr. Hayes. When are the taxpayers of the Western world actually going to start comparing? And I think one of the most important elements of the movie was the comment by Dr. Epstein, where she says that the prosecutees have now become the prosecutors, that they've almost seemed to have learned about that, which I thought was probably one of the most poignant things that was said in the entire movie, where people who have been the victims of this kind of persecution have now become the persecutees, as she mentioned, has become the persecutors. What have they learned from it, and why is that now sort of becoming, is not resonating among the decision makers, both at the political level, and when is that actually going to change, particularly when one compares it to the situation in what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan? So, thank you.
So, Dr. Pakorn, would you like to answer first, please?
Yes, very good point. But don't forget that not only Muslim world who come up with a lot of resolution, but the UN has also come up with a large number of resolution about this point. But we cannot do anything at all. I do agree with you that we have to stop issuing the new resolution, but we have to do something. At the moment, it seemed to me because some of my friends just come back from this conference in Makkah, and he said the situation seemed to change a bit when King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia changed his views and the way in which he tried to interact with the Israeli government. He